Hello everyone, my name is Faisha Rafadeen and I teach high school biology. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through a model virtual lesson that I've created, including several elements that I've tried last year that I felt really increased student participation and engagement. And I'm planning on putting them together during a synchronous classroom this year, or a synchronous virtual classroom this year, in hopes that it will create a more engaging learning experience for my students. So the first aspect of my lesson is that I'm going to be using a flipped model this year. This means that I'm going to have the students watch the mini lecture or mini lesson part of the lesson at home. Students are going to be watching a short 10 to 20 minute video of me explaining the content part of my lesson. And then when they come to class, we're going to use those 30 to 40 minutes that I have with them to work on practice problems, to work on interactive activities, to work on group activities, and to essentially master the content that they've already covered on their own. I'm also going to use the time that I have with them in order to go over any questions that they might have and to cover any misconceptions that they might have about the topic or about the learning targets. Here we have an example of an interactive lecture that I've used with my students last year. So I always begin with the learning targets, and then the first part, I wanted to include a little bit of, engagement, and I did that through using choice boards. And you'll notice that the choice boards include different videos. These videos are very short, maximum of 5 minutes, that the students can watch about an interesting or an engaging, phenomena that ties into the lesson that I was going to cover that day. After the students go through the engage, they then would go through the explore part of the lesson. And during the explore part of the lesson, I basically had them watch the video that I've created instead of watching the video from start to finish, they only watched parts of the videos that kind of went with the slides that they were watching. So let me show you what I mean by that. So first they would watch a part of the video that introduced them to an introduction of my topic. And then this particular lesson, I was explaining the cell cycle. So you'll notice that instead of them just watching a video on the cell cycle, they can go through the different phases of the cell cycle. And as they click on the different phases, it takes them to the part of the video that deals with that particular phase. The first phase of the cell. Okay, so you'll notice that they can go through the different phases. And then when they click on that phase, the video starts playing. The cell cycle is the S phase. S stands for synthesis, and to synthesize something is to make. Okay, so it kind of starts the video at that point where it is explaining that particular phase or that particular part of the lesson. The second part of my lesson is when they do come to class. So this is the synchronous part, the synchronous learning part. They're going to come into class, and this is where I will go over the agenda. The agenda usually includes timing. So I like to time my activities just so the students know how long we're spending on each activity, and for me to kind of have a pacing, to kind of pace myself throughout the lesson, especially that now time is limited. We only have 30 to 40 minutes with our students. So I want to make sure that I utilize this time very wisely. And then I go over the learning targets, and then I want to ask my students to write down any questions or misconceptions that they had while watching the video that I provided at home. I want them to add those into the chat box. And I will use this time to basically answer these misconceptions, to go over any topics that need to be reviewed, and to make sure that all the questions that the students have from watching the video are covered and taken care of. The next part of this synchronous lesson is going to be the practice component. And here's an idea of something I used last year. It is using the discussion board option on Google Classroom to allow students to engage in kind of like a discussion, a back and forth discussion with one another, answering a prompt question. I also used the tag protocol with my students, which is a feedback method that students can use to provide more structured feedback to one another and to have more enriching conversations with one another when it comes to these discussion board type activities. Let me show you an example. You'll notice here that I put the prompt question for them, and I included details about the question itself. And then here's an example of a discussion bit that the students were engaged in. So the tag feedback method is a feedback protocol where students just have a more structured way of giving and receiving feedback. And this is the poster that I've created for my students to kind of guide them through how they should be giving and receiving feedback. All right, and then the last part of this synchronous lesson is checking for their understanding. And for this part, I decided, and again, I tried this last year, I decided to have students create their own videos explaining something they learned about the topic. Usually this means that they have to show their understanding of a learning target or learning targets from the particular lesson that we just covered. This particular student used the application TikTok in order to create an educational short video. So let's see an example. A very creative and engaging way that the student was able to demonstrate the knowledge of the learning target. The reason why I love using videos is because usually you can see that this is the student's work, and you can tell their presentation how well they know the topic, and it's an authentic way for them to demonstrate their learning.